My son told me they cancelled the family trip because money was tight. A week later, I saw their smiling faces at a luxury resort in Sedona. I sat alone in my kitchen, realizing they had used my money for that trip. My heart cracked, not because they left me behind, but because they wanted it that way. And that was the moment I chose not to fight them. I chose something far more permanent. Now tell me, when silence speaks louder than anger, what do you leave behind? And what do you finally take back? I remember the exact moment it began. I was sitting at the kitchen table, my coffee still warm, when my phone buzzed. It was a message in the family group chat. Zane wrote, "Hey everyone, we've decided to cancel the vacation this year. Things are tight financially, so better to just stay put." Tessa reacted with a thumbs up emoji. Nothing more. No one called. No one asked how I felt. I stared at the message for a long while. Every summer, we rented a place near the water. Zane grilled, Emily played cards with me, and Tessa scrolled her phone under a sun hat. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Still, I understood. Times were hard for many. I didn't want to be a burden. So I did something they didn't ask for. I quietly sent Zane some money, just a little, enough to help with groceries or gas. "Use this however you need," I wrote. He replied, "Thanks." And that was it. I tried to shake off the disappointment. Maybe we would have a small picnic at home. Maybe I could host something on my porch. I even made sure the towels were clean and the guest bedroom was ready just in case. But no one showed up. The house stayed quiet. A few days later, I sent a cheerful message with a photo of the backyard roses in bloom. No response. Not from Zane, not from Tessa, not even Emily, who usually at least liked my messages. There was a growing space between us. I told myself it was just a phase. Everyone was busy. But deep down, I started to feel it. Not being included is one thing. Being quietly erased, that's something else entirely. That summer, I began folding myself smaller. I didn't even notice how much space I'd already given up, until later, when the truth came in sideways, sharp and undeniable. The days after that group message passed in a strange stillness. At first, I didn't notice it. I busied myself watering the plants, reorganizing the pantry, going through old magazines I meant to toss. But slowly, I realized something had shifted. Tessa didn't respond to my last message. Just a photo of the roses and a gentle note. No reaction, no little heart emoji, not even a read receipt. I thought maybe she was busy with work or Emily's school. Zane, who used to call every Thursday night without fail, skipped a week, then another. I left the calendar on the fridge untouched. The week of the vacation was still marked with notes. Pack by Friday. Buy sunscreen. Pick up Emily's favorite granola. Each line written in my own careful handwriting. I couldn't bring myself to erase it. Instead, I walked past that calendar every morning like it wasn't there. I cooked smaller meals. I stopped making iced tea in big pitchers. I stopped baking. The house grew quieter. Not just because it was empty, but because I had stopped trying. At night, I sat on the couch and scrolled through my phone, looking at old photos from past vacations. There we were, all smiles and tans, sitting under beach umbrellas, sand clinging to our feet. In one, Zane had his arm around my shoulder, his eyes squinting from the sun. Tessa was holding a drink, laughing. Emily had sunscreen smudged across her nose. It felt like it had all belonged to someone else. I texted Zane once more. Just checking in. Hope work isn't too stressful. No reply. I told myself he would call eventually, that he was just overwhelmed. Maybe the money helped and he felt awkward about it. Maybe Tessa was having one of her cold spells, and he didn't want to cause tension. But even Emily had gone quiet. That hurt more than I let on. She was always the one to send me little videos of her dog or funny TikToks she thought I might like. But this time, nothing. Silence can grow heavy when it lingers long enough. I started to feel like I was talking into a void. My messages didn't echo back. They just floated out and disappeared. One morning, I stood in front of the fridge, looking at the calendar again. I reached up to pull the note down. Pack by Friday. My hand hovered for a moment, then fell. I left it there. Maybe I needed it to remind myself that I was still here, that I hadn't imagined the plans, that I hadn't misunderstood their words. I didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of something deeper. Something colder. Not just the absence of plans, but the beginning of absence, period. The beginning of being erased from the script of their lives, one quiet line at a time. I didn't know it yet, but this was only the start. It was Carly who slipped up first. She and I weren't close. Not really. Tessa's older sister. Always polite, but distant. We had bumped into each other at a community fundraiser a few years ago, chatted over cupcakes and the weather. I hadn't spoken to her in months. But one afternoon, out of the blue, she messaged me a meme, something silly about sunscreen and iced drinks. I replied with a short laugh. This summer sure is different. Carly sent back. Oh, I bet. I think everyone's done enough traveling this year anyway. That sentence stuck with me. It wasn't just the words. It was the assumption behind them. I stared at my screen for a long while, replaying her sentence over and over. Then, almost without thinking, I opened her public profile. I scrolled, not expecting much. And there it was. A group photo. Bright sun. Red rocks. And all too familiar faces. Zane in his hiking boots and ball cap. Tessa with her oversized sunglasses. A matching set with Emily's. The three of them standing in front of a wooden sign that read, Sedona Trailhead. The post was dated just 2 days ago. I clicked again. Another post. This time, a video. Emily twirling in a shallow creek. Laughing. Tessa's voice in the background saying, "This is our kind of peace." Carly was tagged in both. My stomach clenched. I backed out of the app and sat still for a moment. I told myself maybe it was just a one-day thing. Maybe they drove out last minute. Maybe it was something Zane couldn't explain right away. But even as I thought it, I knew better. That evening, I logged into my online bank account. Not because I suspected anything, just because I felt like I needed to look at something real. That's when I saw it. A transfer. Nearly the same amount as the deposit I had sent Zane. Withdrawn from a joint savings account we'd opened years ago when I sold my old house. I had left his name on it at the time, back when trust wasn't a question. The amount matched the estimated cost of a resort package in Sedona almost exactly. I knew because I looked it up. I stared at the screen, my hand frozen on the mouse. It wasn't about the money. I've lived modestly all my life. I've never been one to chase after luxury. It was the choice. The hiding. The way they used my kindness, repackaged it, and turned it into their own private comfort. Without me. The silence now had weight. It wasn't just busyness. It was avoidance. Intentional. Clear. And suddenly, I could see it all. Not just this one trip, but the pattern. The gradual shift. The way I'd been edited out of moments I used to be part of. A slow, quiet erasure. Polite. Smiling. Efficient. That night, I didn't sleep much. I sat at the edge of my bed, the light from the hallway casting a faint shadow across the floor. I kept replaying the last voicemail Zane had left me months ago. It was short. Something about picking up dry cleaning. Nothing about vacation. Nothing about me. I didn't cry. Not yet. But I knew now that something had broken. And this time, it wasn't going to fix itself. The next morning, I poured myself a cup of tea and walked out to the backyard. The basil plants I had tried so hard to nurture through spring were wilting, their leaves curled and yellowing at the edges. I plucked one, held it between my fingers. Even herbs give up when they're forgotten. I stood there for a while, letting the silence wrap around me like a worn quilt. No one called. No text. No apology. Just a quiet world that didn't need me to be awake or breathing. Later that afternoon, I opened the old file cabinet in the corner of the guest bedroom. That drawer hadn't been touched in years. Paper bills, expired coupons, letters from another time. At the bottom, I found it. A cream-colored envelope with my name written in warm, looping handwriting. Rosie Delgado. I hadn't thought of her in so long. Rosie and I used to volunteer together at the downtown shelter before my knees gave out. We'd talk for hours while folding sheets and making tea for the overnight guests. She always said I had the gentlest hands she'd ever seen. The envelope contained a printout. A flyer from nearly 10 years ago. Stillwater's Women's Retreat, a weekend in a cabin just outside Santa Fe. Workshops. Solitude. A hot spring nearby. I remembered she invited me when Zane was going through a tough time in college. I said no, he needed me. Tessa was struggling with Emily. There was always someone needing me more than I needed space for myself. Rosie had tucked in a short note with the flyer. She'd written, "I think you deserve to take up space. Just once, say yes to yourself." But I never did. Until now. That evening, I opened the wooden keepsake box I had buried under old linens. Inside, next to faded photos and ticket stubs from Zane's school plays, was a small brass key. For years, I hadn't even remembered what it unlocked. Then it came back. Rosie once gave me access to her cabin for emergencies. She said it was paid off and that the least I could do was use it when life got too loud. I held the key for a long time, its cool metal surface grounding me. I had spent so many years being needed, useful, available. I had waited for invitations that never came, sacrificed vacations, retreats, quiet afternoons. I thought that was love. But all I had now were silent rooms and basil that wouldn't grow. I didn't pack right away. I didn't even tell myself I was leaving. I just folded 3 clean shirts, a pair of jeans, my walking shoes, and put them in the old canvas tote I hadn't used in years. I left the rest of the tea on the counter and walked out the door. No notes. No calls. No explanations. The drive to the cabin was longer than I remembered. Or maybe time just moved differently when you weren't expected anywhere. No one was waiting for me. And oddly, that thought didn't sting. It felt clean. Quiet. The road narrowed as I passed through the last stretch of pines. Dry needles crunched beneath the tires. Then there it was, Rosie's cabin, nestled between 2 tall evergreens, its wooden frame weathered but proud. A porch light still hung crookedly above the door, just as I remembered. The brass key slid into the lock like it had never left. Inside, dust had settled in the corners, and the air was dry with age, but it wasn't unpleasant. It smelled like cedar and thyme. I didn't bother turning on every light. I unpacked slowly, folded my clothes into the single drawer, opened the windows just enough to let the air in. Then I sat at the kitchen table and listened. There was no hum of a refrigerator. No notifications buzzing from a phone. No voices pushing their way into my thoughts. Only the creak of old wood. The soft rustle of wind in the trees. I lit the small gas stove and made tea. On the bookshelf near the fireplace, I found the guest log Rosie used to keep. Inside it, nestled between old entries and doodles from retreat guests, was a sealed envelope with my name. It was dated 15 years ago. I held it with both hands, careful like it might fall apart. The letter was short, her handwriting still familiar. "I hope someday you find your way here. You give and give and give, but I see how you've started disappearing. You deserve to have a place that remembers you. A place where you don't vanish into usefulness." I read it twice. Then I set the letter beside me and, for the first time in years, I picked up a pen and a notepad. I began to write, not a list of groceries or errands, but something else. Things I've given away without realizing. My sleep. My solitude. My silence. My money. My holidays. My name. My softness. My desire to sing at night when no one was around. My love of cold mornings. My right to be disappointed. My right to say no. I stopped. It wasn't sadness I felt. It was space. The kind of space that made room for breath. I wrapped myself in Rosie's old quilt and stepped outside. The wind moved gently through the trees. The cabin lights cast a quiet glow against the wooden floor. I could hear owls in the distance, their hoots steady like a lullaby no one asked for but everyone needed. That night, I didn't dream. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was missing anything. I wasn't needed. I wasn't forgotten. I simply was. The morning light filtered through the thin curtains, casting long shadows across the cabin floor. I made myself coffee, strong and plain. I carried it to the porch, wrapped again in Rosie's quilt, and let the steam rise against the cool mountain air. The notebook from last night still lay open on the kitchen table. I had written until my hand cramped, but I wasn't finished. So I sat back down and kept going. Things I've given away without realizing. My weekends. My birthdays. My preferences for food, for music, for weather. My opinions in family conversations. My spot in the photo. My space at the table. My ability to say no without guilt. I paused. Then I turned the page and started a new list. Things I still have. My breath. My name. My mind. My kindness. My voice. My truth. That last one stayed with me. It was nearly noon when the tablet lit up on the counter. I had almost forgotten I brought it. There was a missed video call from Emily. Another ping came through before I could even decide what to do. She was calling again. I tapped accept. Her face filled the screen, flushed and hurried, like she had run to find a quiet place. The kitchen behind her was familiar. My kitchen. My old house. She spoke quickly, eyes darting. No Zane. No Tessa. She said they thought I was just being overly sensitive, that I was probably off somewhere sulking and would come around like I always did. She said Tessa told everyone I had chosen to isolate myself. She said Zane barely spoke about me, just kept saying things were complicated. I said nothing. I let her talk. Emily looked at me, her eyes soft. Then she said, quietly, I miss you. I felt something ache in my chest. Not pain exactly. More like a ripple. The kind of feeling that comes when you realize a part of you still wants to be held gently. After the call ended, I didn't cry. I stood up, made another cup of coffee, and opened a clean pad of paper. I titled the page, What Comes Next? I didn't have many answers, but I knew this much. I wasn't going to wait anymore. Not for apologies. Not for explanations. Not for someone to remember that I mattered. I dug through my bag and pulled out Rosie's letter from 15 years ago. I reread it. This time, I didn't just feel seen. I felt reclaimed. Later that evening, I found the legal envelope buried deep in my file box. Inside were documents I hadn't looked at in years. My will, my power of attorney, my estate instructions. I crossed out names. I flipped the page and began again. The night after Emily's call, I couldn't sleep. My body was still, but my thoughts kept circling like wind through the pines outside. Her words echoed, not because they shocked me, but because they didn't. I knew already. By morning, I had a plan. I made oatmeal. I watered the small fern Rosie had left on the windowsill. I washed the dishes slowly, each motion deliberate. Then I took the legal papers I had set aside the night before and laid them across the table. I didn't rush. I called my lawyer, not Zane's old friend from college, not someone who might smooth things over. I called Evelyn, a woman I hadn't spoken to in years but trusted. She used to run a non-profit for women starting over after divorce. She would understand what I was trying to do. I explained that I wanted to make changes to my will, fundamental ones. She asked if I was sure. I said I was done waiting for kindness from people who used mine as leverage. Over the next few days, We worked quietly together. I sent in old documents. She sent drafts back. I made coffee, read by the fireplace, waited for the next call. By the end of the week, my entire estate had shifted. No longer would things be split evenly between Zane and Emily. No longer would Tessa's name be listed anywhere at all. Instead, a trust was born. I called it the Cabin Quiet Fund. It would support women like me, women who had given and been left behind. Women who had been erased softly, not by cruelty, but by being constantly overlooked. The fund would grant short-term stays in retreat cabins. Maybe even this one, if Rosie allowed it. Time and space to hear themselves again. To reclaim the quiet that had been taken from them. Zane and Tessa wouldn't understand. They might never find out, until it was too late to object. But Emily might someday. And maybe, if she grew up and saw the same patterns creeping into her life, she would remember me. Not just as a grandmother, but as a woman who chose not to disappear quietly. When Evelyn asked if I wanted to leave a letter with the paperwork, I said yes. I wrote it in one sitting, not out of anger, not to scold or shame, but to explain. I wrote that I had once believed in being everything to everyone, that I had confused sacrifice with love, that I had stayed too long in the role of helper and forgotten how to be a whole person. But I had remembered now. And I hoped someday they would understand that leaving wasn't the worst thing I ever did. Staying quiet had been. It didn't surprise me when Zane showed up. I knew he would come, not because he missed me, but because Emily told him I was safe and staying at Rosie's cabin. And that meant the secret was no longer a secret. He had always hated loose ends. His car pulled into the gravel driveway just as I was taking cornbread out of the oven. Not for him. I had been baking it already. I didn't change a thing. He walked in like someone arriving for a negotiation. Polite smile. Backpack slung over one shoulder. No hug. I nodded toward the table. Soup. Bread. A salad with tomatoes I picked up from the farm stand. Nothing fancy, but enough to make it look like I expected someone. He sat, took off his jacket, looked around like he had never seen this place before. I didn't know you still talk to Rosie, he said, as if that explained his presence. I didn't answer. He glanced down at his hands, rubbed a spot near his knuckle, that nervous habit he had as a boy whenever he broke something and didn't want to admit it. I'm sorry if things got out of hand, he said after a moment. We didn't mean to hurt you. It's just. Tessa felt like the family vacations were getting crowded. Too many expectations. The word crowded hit me harder than I thought it would. I looked at him and said quietly, I spent decades shrinking myself to make space for all of you. I put aside my own plans, my comfort, my rest. I helped raise Emily. I stayed home when you were sick, when Tessa was tired, when the sitter didn't show up. Not once did I complain. He looked away. I continued. I know about the trip. I know about the money from the joint account. I know that you chose to go without me, not because of finances, but because it was more convenient. Because having me along made you feel watched. Zane didn't deny it. Instead, he said, I thought you might understand. That maybe you needed space too. That was when I realized he still didn't get it. I needed space, I said. But not because of you. Because of what I became when I gave up everything to stay near you. He started to speak again, but I stopped him. The will has been changed. The fund is already in motion. I'm not taking anything from you. I'm giving something back. To women like me. To women who have been erased in plain sight. He looked stunned. Not angry, just unprepared. Like the version of me he had built in his mind had cracked, and something unfamiliar had come through. We finished dinner quietly. I packed the leftovers and handed them to him at the door. As he walked away, he turned and said, You've changed. I didn't reply. But in my head I thought, no. I've finally returned to myself. I hadn't seen Rosie in 17 years. The last time, we were both younger and far too hopeful. Now, standing outside the cabin lodge with the fall leaves crunching under my boots, I felt older, yes, but also clearer. Rosie opened the door as if she'd been expecting me all along. She wore her silver hair tied low behind her neck, and her eyes held that quiet steadiness. Not pity, not surprise, just a kind of welcome that wrapped around you without saying much. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We just sat. Inside, the space hadn't changed much. Wooden beams, soft woven blankets, that faint scent of eucalyptus and old pine. The kind of place where silence spoke first. I poured tea. She poured honey. No ceremony. Just rhythm. "You found the letter," she said. I nodded. I didn't need to explain. She had written it all those years ago, sensing something in me I hadn't even admitted to myself. There was a long pause. Then she said, "Every woman I've met here walked in with a different wound. Some deep, some still bleeding, some almost invisible." She looked straight at me. But they all had one thing in common. They stopped being seen. I felt something settle in my chest. Not a sting. Not a fire. Just a truth I had avoided naming. We didn't spend the afternoon recounting betrayals or disappointments. We spoke about basil plants, handwritten recipes, the way silence feels different when it's chosen. Later, we walked along the edge of the woods. The light through the trees danced like old memories, not all of them painful. As we returned to the porch, she handed me a small linen envelope. Inside was an invitation. The Fall Women's Retreat, not just as a guest, but as someone who might one day lead a session. "Stillness," she said, "is not the absence of sound. It's the presence of yourself." That night, I slept deeper than I had in years. There were no dreams of Emily's face or Zane's excuses, just the wind through the pine trees and the steady beat of a heart that had finally come home. I returned home in the late afternoon, carrying a small suitcase, a few filled notebooks, and a lighter feeling in my chest. The old house hadn't changed. The lilac painting still hung slightly crooked in the entryway. On the kitchen table sat the old calendar, untouched, my red ink note still visible. "Pack by Friday." I stared at it for a moment. Then I tore it off, page by page, until the entire month vanished without a trace. I pulled out a new card Rosie had given me the day before. The front showed a golden hill in autumn with the words, "Fall Women's Retreat. Cabin for Stillness." I hung it where the calendar had been, using a small nail. A quiet symbol, but enough to tell myself I was moving forward. After a simple dinner, I opened my laptop and typed the first subject line for an email invitation. Invitation for 3 women over 65 to experience a stay at the Stillness Cabin. I typed slowly, adjusting each word, not because I wanted it perfect, but because I knew it mattered. I no longer felt the need to teach, to prove, or to justify. I just wanted to create a space for women like me. Women who had once been treated as background figures, expected to stay quiet so things could look peaceful. Outside the window, the wind began to shift. I poured another cup of tea, picked up my phone, and texted Rosie the names of the 3 women I wanted to invite first. They weren't friends, just women I had seen quietly leave church early or sit alone on park benches while others passed them by. I didn't need to reclaim anything. I didn't need anyone's approval. I just needed to live what they could never take away from me. Awareness. If you've ever felt forgotten by the very people you've loved the most, maybe this story was meant for you. Sometimes, we don't need to shout to reclaim our place. We just need to quietly stand up, step out of the old kitchen, and choose to live this time for ourselves.